Good evening and welcome to the October 25th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight we're going to have a discussion on the Central Area Plan regarding urban and compact schools, and we have two representatives from the school district to help us make sure that we can construct schools that are beneficial both to the city and to the school district. But first, we have a set of minutes that we have to approve. So would somebody like to make a motion for the minutes of September 13th?
I would like to move that we approve the minutes of September 13th.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I'd like to set a motion to accept the minutes from September 27th.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Minutes for October the 11th.
And I'd like to make a motion for the minutes of October 11th.
A second.
Any discussion?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
We're just rolling.
You see how well that was orchestrated? So Trish, I assume that you're going to lead us in this discussion.
Well, first I thought I would just go through super deluxe fast what's in your packet, which is the policies that you've already seen for urban schools and the definitions for urban and compact schools. And then you all had asked last time to have policies also for compact schools. So those are in your packet, and you also asked that we invite the school district and school board folks to come and talk with us about this and engage in a good conversation so we better understand what both groups are hoping to get, and so they are here as well. So far everything is coming together really well. The background on this, you might have forgotten why we did compact schools last year in 2017. Part of it was the King County policies that required cities and school districts to work together to find school sites, to make schools more efficient, to use the land better. And also the school district requested that we review our code to make it easier for them to be better stewards of the land, use it more efficiently, because they were thinking of putting up a school up on the hilltop up in the Highlands, and it was a very small parcel. And so they had requested that we look at the code, and the outcome of all that between King County and the district is that we amended the code for compact schools, and that happened at the end of September last year. So this year, here we are again, because you all had asked when we were going through the compact schools discussion, it worried you a little bit that there was no policy safety net, if you will, or no policy direction about compact schools or urban schools. And so you asked us if we would review that this year, which is sort of backwards from how we usually do things, but since the school had asked for the code amendment and King County had asked last year for it, we did that first, but now we're coming back to sort of fill in the policies and talk about those a little bit. So that's what we're continuing to talk about tonight. And the new definitions that you already had seen at the last meeting where we talked about this, the urban schools and compact schools, I think they were tweaked just a little bit from the last time you saw them, and these are in your packet. In fact, Ann or Steve, do you guys need packets? Information?
I have one.
Okay, because we have spares if you need them. I just
Well, if you
haven't.
have a spare, I guess I would take it,
Oh,
because this
sure.
is very scribbled on. Thank you.
And so these, we're hoping that these definitions would actually go into the code, the land use code and the central Issaquah standards. And the policies that you already reviewed last time were again about urban schools, and these are in your packet, that talks about how to cite them, how the smaller footprint, green building techniques, all those kinds of things. And then the new ones that you haven't reviewed yet are the ones that you had asked for. These were just some simple amendments to the existing goal and the existing policy about smart growth and being a regional leader. We thought these seemed to already talk a lot about what we're talking about with compact and more efficient, but it wasn't specific to educational facilities or institutional. So we put those in to amend those two pieces. And then these were the new policies. There's several for urban schools. And we threw compact in there too, since it's the overriding. Compact are all the schools in the city, and urban are those more dense that are just in central Issaquah, just in the smaller area. And these talk about being designed as bus priority instead of car priority. And I would imagine that compact schools would be able to do that to some extent, but we would want urban schools to do that to a greater extent. We still need to talk about what that means, but that's what we're trying to get to, that if there's more ability for the kids to walk and bike and have separate ways, so that the biking child does not run over the walking children on the sidewalks, things like that. So those are two new ones, and then there's also three new ones as well that talk about smaller footprints, supporting infrastructure for the smaller school, using the least amount of land. We even threw in that perhaps the sites should be less than 5 usable acres, so that you're starting with a smaller footprint. So that's a policy to consider. And then to sort of round out our discussion, we wanted to put this is the existing code for compact schools that you adopted last year with 65-foot height, a minimum floor area of 0.75, which we talked about when we were talking about municipal facilities, that so far not many of our facilities have that, but then it's only been required on the books for, a year. So that's ambitious, which is good to be ambitious. And so in putting these up here, I thought this would be a good place to start engaging with the school district on how are they doing with their thinking about compact schools. And I know when they designed the one on Hilltop, it was very compact. It was, 6 acres? And it had a really great design. It's too bad that they weren't able to move forward with that. But just to try to get the conversation started, I threw some questions in that might be a place for us to start, or if you all want to start somewhere else. But to me, a starting spot was building height. If compacts are 65, would you ever imagine making an urban school taller than 65 feet? Or is height not in the wheelhouse of how things would be more efficient for you? And then setbacks, would you ever have an urban school that has 0 on any of the sides? Or do you always need some sort of a buffer from whatever the adjacent use is? The minimum lot size, we talked about maybe 5 acres or less. Sharing recreation facilities, sharing parking, with a nighttime use. Is that something that you could see in the future, when the time comes that you can build schools in Central? Or are there other ways of being more efficient, being more compact and urban? So I'm just throwing those out there, and I'm going to go sit down so that you all can talk amongst yourselves. But I thought these were just some thoughts to start from, or you may have other places that you want to start. If there's any slide you would rather me have on the screen.
I know that there's some, I wouldn't say confusion, but some concern between the two types of schools. And I kind of like to start with what you, as a school district, how do you take them apart? How do you, I know that, again, they're lumped together, and are there things that really drive them apart and make them different with different requirements?
And we look at the definition difference between them, and
Yeah, we
does
can-
that make sense to you guys?
Well, that's where I was getting at.
button.
So they are different, so I know that,
If it's red, is it on?
Yep, it's on.
Okay. I think definition is a good place to start. There are 2 definitions, one for urban and one for compact schools. And there's a really key differentiation there, and that is that urban schools are a type of compact school located only in central Issaquah.
could you talk louder? Speak louder? Just a little.
So I can do that. So there's one real key difference between the definition of urban and compact school, and that is that an urban schools are a type of compact school located only in central Issaquah. So basically, if it's in central Issaquah within the core area plan, it's an urban school. It fits into that category. If it's outside of that area, it's a compact school. And the definitions are different, and the needs of the facilities, the requirements of the facilities are going to be different in those two different distinct areas. And so part of the concern was that while the definition defines two separate things, some of the other policies tend to lump them together, and that becomes a difficult issue.
And part of the outcrop of this is that next year, we hope to bring back urban school regulations, and so this could be like the starting point, that if a compact school outside of Central can be 65 feet, how tall could an urban school be? Can it be 100 feet? You know, can it be 2 more stories, or can it be, so this is sort of, it was good that you started out with that question, because we're trying to figure that out too, regulation-wise. Does it change, how much more dense should the regulations be in the urban area in Central versus outside the city?
So with that, I think you have to look to the future and say, how many houses are you going to be building in Central, in the core? And how many children does that equate to? And will 4 stories work, but without the ability to put extra outside buildings in it? Or do we need, at some point in time, to go up higher to meet the needs of all these kids?
Right, well, for the urban core alone, we're supposed to have over 2,000 housing units in there.
And so
to
how
meet the
many
regional growth.
schools at 4 stories does that?
Well, that becomes a really interesting question, because we don't have in this city history to show or to indicate how many students would be generated in that type of development. If we look at Redmond, where there is a lot of recent 4 or 5 story residential over commercial and or retail space, it's a very low generation rate. I could pull out the numbers, but in Redmond, in the Lake Washington School District, there's like 22 or 300, oh, I should probably just get the numbers out. It's well over 2,000 multifamily units, and there's like 250 kids, grade full, the whole K-12 grade span. North Shore has a fairly high number of recent multifamily units and a very, very low student generation rate. So right now, it's really hard to predict. And within those total number of units, you don't know how the mix of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedroom units will be. And well, it's kind of hard to predict. I would say that it's not multiple schools, and I think the district will be challenged to provide for the full grade spans, and we'll have to get creative in how the full student K-12 population is handled in the urban area. So part of our district thinking has been that there will be a large number of units. We're not sure what the generation rates would be, but there will be more kids in the urban core area, and that the existing district administration site is a site that we are looking to try and reserve for the future, so that when those kids start to arrive, there's some land available to be able to accommodate those students and the space that they'll need. So that's moved us in our current building program to look at sites for the 2 new elementary schools and middle school and the high school to other sites, and all of those other sites are outside of the core area. So they're all sites that would fit within the compact schools definition.
Mm-hmm.
My only concern with a 65-foot height is that once it's in code, you can only go 65 feet, and there might be a need in the future too.
So in the past, we've always had to go for a variance or an adjustment to be able to build a 3-story school. So part of what we were trying to do last year was to increase an allowable height so that we could at least get to a 3-story school without having to go for a variance. In the past, we were working on property that we owned, so there was less risk. A good probability that we'd get the variance, but we weren't looking to buy new property that might cost millions of dollars and have to gamble or risk that on the possibility that, well, this time you're not going to get a variance. So we wouldn't be able to do what we wanted to do. If you look at Clark Elementary, it's a 3-story elementary. It's the first one that we did because it's on a very compact footprint and small lot size. It fits just under the 65 feet. So we felt that that was probably an appropriate solution. We are currently looking at some other sites, particularly a middle school site, where we may be 4 stories with 2 stories of parking below. Now, that's not going to fit within 65 feet, but there's also a variation in how your building height is measured in the ordinances, depending on whether it's on a downsloping site or an upsloping site. So that changes things too. That site was approved for other projects that had much higher buildings, and so it has some individual development
So we'll look
standards and
We'll
restrictions.
look at that, but I was remiss. Could you introduce yourselves?
I'm Steve Crawford, Executive Director of Capital Projects for the Issaquah School District.
And I'm Ann Moore. I'm the current president of the school board, and I'm really here to, engage and hear about this conversation because it's certainly something that the school board and the city council talked about actually 2 years ago when we had, or 2.5 years ago when we had a linkage, and now we're finally coming back to defining all this. So I wanted to sit in on it, contribute if I can, and then see where we can have the school board and city council potentially in the future, have a conversation about this as well.
That'd be great.
So let's get back to the definition. Are you comfortable with the definition as they are?
So if we look at urban schools, for the most part, that's okay. On the end of the third line, it says, they serve and are designed for children to walk or bike to. Okay? If I take that in a literal sense, it means that they're going to be designed for walking and biking access only. We are a school district of 109 square miles. An average, even if we build after we build our 2 new elementary schools, an elementary school serves over, well, close to 5 square miles. Middle school serves, when we get the 6th one built, over 18 square miles. In the high school, it's 27 square miles. So
So we do have elementary schools at this point that are non-bus serving schools.
we have some elementary schools in locations where they're predominantly walking, biking. Those are fortunate and those are nicely located. We don't have quite the flexibility today with the scarcity of land.
Yep.
We have King County that's established policy that says we can't build schools in the rural area. So we know that we're going to have to bus all of the kids in the rural area into the urban area. So we also know that a lot of kids have a lot of after-school activities, whether it's sports or other educational appointments, medical, et cetera, that there's going to be some level of driving. We've visited Seattle schools, and they don't have provision for parent pickup drop-off, and the streets around those schools are 100% totally congested in the mornings and afternoons, and the neighbors are pretty unhappy about it. So I think that there is appropriately an emphasis on the fact that we would try and locate those schools so that they would be predominantly walking, but it reads a little bit too much like it's only walking and biking. And I'm pretty confident, particularly when, I know there'll be special education buses, because those kids come from a very diverse geographic area. So I think there has to be something in there that talks about
Primarily?
bus service.
G4.
Well, I mean, if you just put the word primarily designed for children to walk and bike to, not necessarily,
Helps.
it helps. Oh, well, hey, I'm open for suggestions.
Well, there's one of the new proposed policies, G4, also states that it's going to, the compact and urban schools will be designed to accommodate primarily bus traffic and not car traffic. So it kind of calls that out as well.
Right, except there, you're getting back into the mix of compact and urban. So
Now, let's
that may
take
be
one thing
true,
at a time.
that may be
Let's-
true in
let's do
urban,
this, and
right,
then-
in the central Issaquah, but to suggest that is true in a compact school outside of central Issaquah probably isn't going to be able to go that far, not in the type of schools, even with the type of school we were trying to build in the compact site on the hilltop, it would never just be bus, or, I guess it would be bus, but it would have to be school bus and not just transit, which is one of the things that gets mentioned at one point as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we correct this and then move on to all these other things that might cause hookups? And we don't have to do
It's not so
exactly
mu-
what the school district says. I mean, thinking about it, I don't think living in the Highlands and coming down at between 8:45 and 9:15, it takes 45 minutes to get through that stop sign.
Yes, it does.
So is that something that we want based on the fact that there's going to be more traffic in the urban core based on more people? How does that help?
Well, I think in an area where there is more traffic, you will have stoplights and kids crossing at stoplights rather than crossing guards, which is our problem up in the Highlands, in addition to the people dropping their kids off. But yeah, I agree. And I think bringing up the point of Seattle schools where there isn't parking and it affects the neighboring areas obviously shows that that's something to consider even in a very dense environment.
Because I believe in Seattle, some of the schools, actually, some of the streets next to those schools actually shut down during peak hours, like the streets.
And a number of the Seattle schools are located where there's a grid street pattern, and some, as you say, those streets are closed. That becomes the vehicle pickup drop-off. And the street on the other side of the block is often the bus pickup drop-off. We don't have too many locations where we have a grid pattern.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because that doesn't exist, we have to accommodate that vehicle and bus pickup and drop-off on site, which tends to make sites bigger. It'd be nice if we had nice grid patterns. But then you're back into the situation that's similar to what you have at Grand Ridge, where the buses are dropping off parallel to the street, which is really, for many, many years, was the only way in and out of the neighborhood above that.
Well, we don't have buses at Grand Ridge, but yes, the idea that people are pulling in parallel to the street, yeah.
So,
So as far as the definition, is it wise to add that word primary just to
Yeah.
open it up a little bit?
Sure.
I don't think you're going to ever get a school where kids are not going to be dropped off.
Shuttled in.
Or buses, or I don't think that you can, and I agree, I think it's very specific in that sentence, and I would like to open it up so that,
Not so narrow.
I mean, the thing we're talking about is our children. and we need to make them safe, and we need to get them schools. So how would you like to change that? Would it be enough to primarily to walk and bike to as a
I think that's
starting-
fine as a definition. We get into some of the other details later on in like policy G4 that talks about bus priority instead of car priority. Yes, we have to get into the whole urban versus
Right, so
compact
let's,
mix.
right, so
but-
let's get through this. So if
I
we.
like the word encourage.
They serve and are designed to encourage children to walk, bike, and play, or to? Yeah, can I have a consensus? Encourage, primarily.
So
I
primarily
think encourage is
designed
probably a better word.
to, so primarily designed to encourage children to walk or bike?
Okay, you get both of
I
them.
like both, yeah, it's a win-win.
Does that
Like
work?
it.
Primarily
Okay,
designed.
so moving on to compact schools.
Okay, so that's everything outside of the core area, which is okay and understandable. Pedestrian-friendly design is okay. Architectural interest through a variety of building heights and forms, that's okay. Efficient multi-story development, we're already doing that, so that's okay.
Okay.
Structured parking, yeah,
Well, I think there's going to have to be some type of structured parking, no matter what you do.
and, you know, we had shown structured parking on the proposal for the Hilltop site. We're using structured parking, and we had shown structured parking before we even got started beyond the bond issue planning for the high school and the future middle school as well. So structured parking's okay, and sites typically smaller than traditional suburban schools. That's okay.
Yeah, it doesn't commit you to anything. It's just a general statement, so that's stay.
The only thing that I would bring up is Connie's comment that she sent in, talking about how there isn't any maximum necessarily proposed here. And so,
In the policies, though, we talk about a minimum lot size for them. I don't-
minimum lot size.
Right, so that the lot itself is smaller, that you start with. Instead of starting with a big suburban size lot, you're starting with a much smaller lot.
So,
Where does that
On one of the tables?
happen?
I understood Connie's concern was, well, if you buy a 40-acre site and you build an elementary school on it for 5 acres, are you still going to get to clear all the land and pave all 90% of it?
Right.
Will that be kind of an infeasible and practical thing to do that wouldn't happen?
Right.
Yes, but if we looked at maybe a larger site of a 12-acre, you know, not necessarily going to the full extent that you were talking about, but something,
So another issue becomes the actual amount of usable land on a site. Pacific Cascade Middle School has about 19 acres of usable land on a 45-acre parcel. So I would hate to have a maximum parcel size as a limit, because you could end up with that kind of a situation where less than half of it's actually usable when you take
Right.
out the slopes and wetland areas and things like that.
Right, and that's why our number was actually usable, because we know most of the sites that are left are troublesome.
Yeah.
so where does it talk about the idea of a usable lot size?
I think, let's see, where is that?
Land use policy G5.
Yeah, G5.
Unusable acres.
Okay. Okay, then I think that addresses Connie's concern there.
Well, usable addresses the question of usable acreage as opposed to total acreage, but for sites should be less than 5 usable acres. That's totally out of the realm of feasibility. An elementary school, if you just take a 3-story building with parking underneath it, even in the Highlands proposal, that was almost 7 acres. You guys have a 12.5% tree retention, so if you're looking at a site with trees, theoretically, 12.5% of it's going to be reserved for tree retention. If you add up just an acre of space for a elementary play field and the area of the building and 50% of the parking, you're over 5 acres. If you add up the same, I mean, the footprint of a 3 or 4-story high school is going to be 3 acres before you have anything else. And so if you add up the minimums on a high school, you're pushing 20 acres.
Of usable space?
Yeah.
Okay. And did Hilltop, remind me, did Hilltop have a field? A
Yes.
play field with it? Okay.
It was a compact
I remember it was I
Field.
thought it was small, but I couldn't picture quite where it was, but
Yeah.
okay.
on the
We can
south
take a
end.
look at that. Would you rather it be separated by type of school? You know, like you said, 6 or 7 acres for an elementary.
Well, that would be a better,
It would help you in your,
I mean, we can't build a middle school in the city of Issaquah. We can't build a high school in the city of Issaquah.
with
Again, this is saying urban and compact.
right.
Now, this is in the entire city of Issaquah, that no school could be on more than 5 usable acres.
Right.
So this just proves that every school is different, and you can't have specifics that have to be adhered to because every school is different. Every land,
lot,
every
yeah,
lot is
parcel.
different.
Every remaining scrap of land.
And if it was 6 or 7 for elementary and 20 for high, what would you say for middle? I mean, just estimate. I won't
I
hold
want to
you to it.
refine the numbers a little bit. The Talus site is 8.9 acres, and we can't fit a softball field on there. And so it's probably 11 or 12.
Are you planning on any shared resources? So if we, if we're moving into a microsite or policy, or we have less students in a building than we do in a typical high school today, does that require its own field, or do you envision 2 schools or 2 micro schools sharing facilities?
You have some need for recreational space at each school. You might end up in a situation sharing some facilities, but if you're at an elementary school, you don't have that much time for recess. So you're not going to go walking down the block. That's going to have some parent safety, security concerns as well.
That is if you can cite 2 schools close together. Otherwise, you're going to be putting the kids in buses, taking them to another school.
And there wouldn't be time for that in a school day. Plus, in the school's PE, which is really a subject, uses up our outside facilities as well. So they're not just used for recess, they're actually educational facilities and spaces that would be used throughout a day by each of the schools.
Right. But I
Seems-
thought, but like Talus had the track and a field inside the track though, right? But just not enough room for a softball? Is
Correct.
that what, okay.
Correct.
So it has some, but not all.
Not as much as what our other middle schools have.
Right.
Right.
Right, so you'd end up sharing, like if they had football or something, they'd have to go to some other place.
Well, the field inside a track, it's football, soccer, and lacrosse.
Right,
So all 3 of those are pretty heavily used by the community after school. So part of this policy says that we should be providing recreational spaces for community use.
Right. 'Cause you
We
do that
also
already.
need those at the high school and middle school for PE programs. I mean, the elementary school, it's recess and community use afterwards.
Right.
I mean, track at a middle school is huge. I mean, there's 250 kids that participate in the track program at most of the middle schools. And then again, it's a lot, I mean, we don't have middle school football teams, but the space gets used heavily for community use.
But on that site, if it didn't have the softball field, then they would have to use like either one of the other middle schools?
They're going to have to get
To go
transported
off-site.
to
For that
Tibbetts
sport.
or to Issaquah Middle School and share.
Right, so that's an example of where we
Of how you.
we could share and
Right.
use one of your facilities if we were able
Right.
to use Tibbetts for it, because that would, in that particular case, be closest.
close,
Or have to bus them to the other middle schools that have those softball fields.
Right, right, okay.
Mr. Crawford, can I ask you a question? I'm Emily Arteche, senior planner with the city of Issaquah. I was looking at Gibson School, which looks like a very compact school, but it was really hard to tell exactly what the FAR for that was and how the students get their recreational facilities met there. Even though it's smaller, with a smaller school population, it still has the same
They-
needs.
They used the gym and the weight room that was a part of the old Issaquah Middle School. So that's still there for their use, as well as a hard surface play area outside that's probably the size of a couple basketball courts. And those students are typically at school 3 days a week. And then that's a program that has a large internship.
Yeah, they have internships on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so the kids aren't really on campus. It's a very different model of school.
Nice.
So to get some structure in this, instead of going back and forth and not being able to come up with a decision on anything, can we go back to policy A and just kind of tear that apart?
So if you look at G5, okay, well, I'm sorry.
Let's do one.
You're doing the UCA1?
Yeah, just, yeah. I would like to see a family that has a second grader put that child on a transit bus.
I was just going to mention that. I think that it's a challenge to try to say that, or to think that we're not going to have school buses.
Although, when I was in high school, I took a transit bus.
For high school, that it's certainly.
But it was a completely different kind of school, but,
Yeah.
and a definitely different area, kind of world that we have now.
So the school buses transport between, well, it's over 8,000 kids in the morning and in the afternoon. If you prioritize transit isn't going to be able to provide the service, and you're going to end up having a whole lot more parents driving their kids to school. And transit wouldn't come anywhere close to serving the entire population area of the district. So that was rather problematic.
For elementary, I think we were thinking more the staff, the teachers and administrators would be using transit perhaps, not the little people.
Yeah, but it says provide alternatives to school buses.
Right,
So that takes me to kids.
right, so we should separate that out into,
I don't think what it says is wrong, but I think it needs to be clarified, just like we clarified the first definition of urban schools. It's always great to reduce automobile trips and greenhouse emissions. All that stuff is good, but does it say you have to?
No.
no.
Well, I think minimize auto dependence is good.
It just says seek locations that provide these benefits. It's not providing any requirements that school buses be replaced with transit or anything like that. I think it's just enabling opportunities with things like school siting and weather protection.
As long as the city doesn't look at that and say, that says this, and whoever is in charge at that point in time says, well, this is what it says, this is what we've agreed to, and
Well, the alternative to school buses is we're not going to allow you to have a bus pickup and drop-off area.
I guess the word that's probably troublesome is the word alternatives, because again, if students are the greatest part of the population, the best way to transport students still sounds like school buses, not necessarily cars or public transportation. That's the greatest way to move that amount of people. I guess the word alternatives is right in front of school buses is what makes it
Right, because
somewhat a
the school
troublesome
buses
statement,
are
because the school buses are the
best way to move
primary-
the most number of kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, perhaps.
It's also an urban school, and the line right above that, we call it pedestrian and bicycle routes, right? Which kind of are part of the same sentence as an alternative to buses.
Oh, so you're putting it with the front. I like that.
So I think we probably need to rewrite that a little bit so that we talk about the safe pedestrian and bicycle routes and the kind of the things that are going to transport the kids differently than
Staff.
citing for staff to use transit routes.
Well, I think if you put a period after transit routes, that takes care of seeking locations that offer safe pedestrian bicycle routes and nearby transit routes. Those are citing kinds of things. Then I'm not sure how we word. I don't think you can provide alternatives to school buses, but I don't know that we want to say,
Okay, going on that, instead of putting a period there, what if you have that sentence go to nearby transit routes and then eliminate everything from there to making it easier? So you're just saying, cite the locations, nearby transit routes, making it easier for students, teachers, and staff to walk, bike, or bus to school.
that's fine, because bus is there.
Exactly.
Nice.
but I'm just playing devil's advocate here. So it says seek locations. Does that mean that you have to have those type? Can you add something that says, based on the land, based on where it is, based on best planning, smart growth, something that allows some,
Gives a little meat to the
variance.
policy.
Right,
well,
but it is just, it's aspirational, though. I mean, it's not a requirement like the code would be. It's sort of giving you the flavor of what we're looking for when we're citing them.
okay, as
These
long
are the
as you,
things that make it a good site versus a not as great site.
okay.
That's how I view it, is that you wouldn't be held to meeting each one of them, but it's certainly aspirational.
Okay, as long as it's known that it's aspirational.
Right.
Okay. I think the way the school district read that is that this is the way it's going to be, and if that's not specifically, if this is just what we would like it to be, that's a little different.
Right.
So I think seek locations is okay. We would be trying to find locations that provide safe and efficient routes to the school.
And you guys are
This
obviously
again
trying
is-
to maximize your land use anyway.
Yeah, and if you can't find one I mean, if there's no transit route that's anywhere close, well, you've looked at alternatives, and there's a basis for the decision that this is the best place.
Right, and this is still just about central Issaquah.
Right.
Right.
It should also be your aspiration to have transit everywhere in central
exactly.
Issaquah.
Exactly.
Therefore, if we cite a school in central Issaquah, it will be near transit.
Right, exactly.
Okay? So leaving it the way it is?
Okay.
A2.
Okay?
It's the same as when I was in the Arts Commission, we were trying to find places to have big concerts. You know, we thought, oh, the school district, we can use that facility, but we can't because it's used all the time in the high school.
Yeah, that's one thing that we initially were thinking as well, but when we started to look at the schedule of school use, the only time that was available for community use was the summer, and that's not when the community programs take place, so.
I think the kids come first, so,
Well, that is true, because it's an educational facility.
yes. Fine?
That's fine.
A3.
That's okay. We've been, ever since we built the first school, and in every building since 2000 has complied with Washington's Sustainable Schools Protocol, which is in essence similar to LEED Silver. And it's been a few years now, but the last time we looked, we doubled our footprint area, and our BTU consumption was the same as it had been before. We've been doing sustainable practices and green building strategies for years. Okay.
Oh,
It's
gee.
the district is a green ribbon school, a district, and all of the schools are level 3 on King County's green schools.
Or higher.
So I make a request to staff. Could you use a lighter color so we
I
can read it?
realized that after we printed it, it was like, uh-oh, I need another color instead of green. Yeah, sorry about that.
Got my magnifying glass out to see if I could read it.
I did too.
Okay, G.
Can I ask you a question? As we do G, so I understand that the policies, the UC policy A1, A2, A3 that we just did, that's central Issaquah, and that's central Issaquah only. So when we go to the I guess the, you know, like
Land use, right.
land use goal G in this comprehensive plan, is that covering all of
All of them.
Issaquah now?
Right, right.
So I think we should probably look through these and figure out if there are specific ones that diverge in their needs between compact and urban.
I don't think that one does.
I don't think these ones do. I think looking further in is what you're talking about.
Okay. No problems, let's.
Yep.
These are both okay?
Next one. I think it's G4, where we come into the idea of bus priority versus car priority. And I would even throw in the idea of walking and biking priority. It sounds like we've talked about an urban school should be walking and biking priority with bus as secondary. And a compact school would be bus priority with car secondary. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so
You also can take the students from the immediate community. If you're doing compact schools outside the city, you're going to be busing things in from the
You are. So,
hinterlands.
right, that's back on G3.
Yeah.
The words around from the immediate community, I mean, we draw kids from the area it takes to fill the school, right? We have to, I mean, we have kids at Issaquah Middle School that come out of Bellevue because that's where I live and that's where the nearest middle school is Issaquah Middle School. So yes, we always take kids from the immediate community, but the immediate community could be quite a few square miles, right? Because we have to, but it's always the goal to have kids be
Close to the school.
close, but it's certainly not necessary. I mean, you'll never have middle schools with all walking because there's not enough density to produce enough kids that can walk to a middle school.
So we don't have enough children to only build schools for Issaquah children? We have to assume population from outside the city?
We certainly do. We're the Issaquah School District with 110 square miles, and
Okay.
kids from the city of Bellevue,
Yeah, it
Newcastle,
includes Bellevue,
Renton,
Renton.
Sammamish, Issaquah, and King County.
Interesting,
That's all.
okay.
I remember being bused in from Duval to Tolt. That's how it was cross city lines. So.
So how's the decision made then, so if we need to build a compact school, we see the growth, how do we make the decision on whether we build it inside Issaquah city limits, or we build it in Bellevue, or?
The good part is, where do we find the land? So the land is so limited now. We build where we can find land.
Okay.
So you're always looking at where your attendance areas are, where the growth is, transportation, access routes, and where parcels are available. Availability of land is a big driver. And
And where we have the overcrowded schools, right? So where we have the growth and we have more kids than really should be in those schools, drives where we want to put schools, to offload the full schools.
And what's your outlook now for what's on the horizon? Is it within Issaquah compact or urban, or is it outside of Issaquah city limits?
right now,
Right
we'll
now, yeah,
have-
we have one, we've acquired a site for an elementary school that's in Sammamish that will serve really both Issaquah and Sammamish, because it's right there near the separation between Issaquah and Sammamish.
the middle school is, the site that we're looking at for the middle school is inside the city limits. The site that we prefer for the high school also accommodates an elementary school, and that's in the city limits. In the city limits, it's not in the core area.
Right, so they'd be under your compact schools versus your urban schools.
So the next 3 schools for the school district will be within Issaquah city limits.
That is our goal. I mean, that's our hope with the sites we've identified that we're attempting to acquire.
It's good to know, because that's just even more traffic that's coming into the city in the form of buses, in the form of cars.
For instance, in the middle school, the site that we're looking at off of SR 900 allows us to bring in some kids out of the Maywood Middle School on the south end of the district, which is our most heavily populated, overcrowded middle school. We know that there's some pretty significant growth occurring in the Newcastle area, and to bring those kids into Issaquah Middle School creates more urban traffic. If the 900 site works out, it's a really short, quick trip into that site from the Maywood tennis area, and from Newcastle, it keeps kids on the west side of the city and out of the urban core, which helps reduce traffic that's getting to Issaquah Middle School. Works out really well. Those are the kinds of things that we're trying to look at. We know that Issaquah High School is overcrowded. It's too big. So Skyline is also overcrowded and too big. The site that we're hoping to acquire for high school is in the middle. It'll allow us to bring both of those school populations down, which is going to reduce the traffic in the core area on 2nd Avenue.
Good goals. Hope it works.
We're trying.
So with that in mind, considering the Issaquah School District does stretch across multiple cities, would having requirements and regulations like this encourage you to build in other cities, or would it allow you actually to build more in Issaquah because you could do something on a smaller site?
We're going to do something on a smaller site primarily because there isn't a bigger site available. If there was a bigger site available for the same kind of money, I would advocate for buying that, because then the district has some land bank for the future. But that just doesn't exist. So would it
Would this hinder?
Would it drive us to other areas?
Yeah.
Well, if we had to build if you said, absolutely, you got to build on 5 acres or less, we're going to have to go somewhere else.
So does it make more sense to divide compact and urban schools?
Wait, say that again?
Is it, I'm just throwing it out, since we combine both of them, should we separate them to, if there's enough difference that you guys find between the 2 schools?
Well, I looked at it initially like there are some central area plan policies here that I think pretty well defined what the goals were for the urban core school area. And that the second part was, I viewed it more as the areas outside of the core, and that I think it would be cleaner, easier to understand if those were focused on the compact schools outside the core.
I think it makes more sense to divide them, since they have different requirements. I don't know how you can lump them together, but
And that's where it kind of got difficult.
And we haven't even got to the metrics yet as far as density. Do the other cities have the same goals as far as density, ARV, that we're building for Issaquah? Like, does Sammamish have a definition even for a compact school? Does it even know what a compact
No.
school
No.
is?
No, we're the
Right.
first.
No.
Yeah.
So we're splitting these out, but we still have schools outside of our control that are in their cities that
Right.
don't fall within that definition.
Right.
Does that drive your decisions of where you build, or are you just always in the mindset, let's make it as dense as we possibly can going forward, or?
If they got so restrictive that it made it really, really difficult to build in Issaquah, we would probably be forced to look at trying to find more actively property in other adjacent areas.
Which is why we
tough.
invite you here to provide comment to tell us when we're hitting that edge.
And what we're trying to do is come up with a set of policies that works for the city, that works to allow construction of schools in the city, because the sites that we would see as our first choices, except for one, are all currently in the city of Issaquah.
And it's the school district's prerogative to build primarily in the city. You'd prefer to build your schools within city limits if possible.
You mean the city of, specifically the city of Issaquah?
Right.
We want to build the schools where the kids are. So
Okay.
as we have more growth in Sammamish, that's why we're building an elementary school in Sammamish. Meet that need. Now, it will probably draw, it may draw some from Issaquah as well, because it's up near Klahani, which could draw from south of it, right? Which could, wherever the border is between Issaquah and Sammamish. So, I mean, I don't think we sit here with the goal of just building in the city of Issaquah. We want to build where the kids are.
Sure.
I mean, we might would have been happy to build a middle school down in the south end where we own land, but it was outside the urban growth boundary, and therefore we couldn't.
problems.
So Trish, did you get the commentary that we kind of want to split
To
the
take out the
compact and
reference to
urban?
urban out and make sure whatever we've said about urban are clear in the central. Perfect.
The idea being that these would just be about compact,
Compact,
but
right.
not applying to urban.
Yes.
I
Right.
mean, it's a challenge when you say, though, that urban is a subset of
It's a subset,
compact,
right.
because then you would think in reverse that it would apply to urban, but
Right, and I think we just make sure when we went back to look at the urban ones, that we captured some of the pieces that we thought should actually prescribe to those as well.
And for that, I would say one of the differences I see is that it's a walk and bike priority followed by bus, rather than making it just a bus priority followed by cars.
So
That
you're
would be-
saying bus priority followed by cars is compact?
Correct.
Yes.
The way it's written right now,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, but urban schools, you would add in a layer of walking and biking priority.
With
And maybe that only applies to an elementary where you're really going to be able to achieve that pulling in from the areas around, but at least it talks about that idea.
because if you have the density, you have the goal. If you have enough density, we'd have enough kids to have them walking.
Yep.
Whether that actually works, whether there are enough kids generated by the type of housing is the bigger unknown.
And topography plays into it as well, because in the urban core, it's going to be flat. So it's going to be easier to walk and bike. Islands is a challenge, and we have more people that drive than we would hope, because it was supposed to be walking.
Yep. And Talus would be an entirely different beast.
Alice, you know, we did a study, and there's almost 9% of the kids that would go to that middle school that come out of the Taos community, which was a surprise to me. But some of those kids will walk and maybe to school, but might get picked up to go home.
Uphill.
So those are different challenges that affect the means of ingress and egress.
I don't think you can meet every need in a
Policy document,
a
yeah.
document like this, so.
Yeah. And we're just trying to make something that's flexible enough that it satisfies your goals and allows for construction of schools.
We don't spend our 24 hours a day thinking about how to plan schools like you do.
So do any of the other,
Okay, so in G3, we're going to partner with the city to meet the anticipated growth of the city. That's going to happen, but do recognize that we have to accommodate the growth that occurs throughout the whole district. So there's another layer there as well. And I think the rest of it is pretty much okay.
so you had a problem with the immediate community idea. I was going to propose new compact schools should be located to offer safe pedestrian, bicycle transit, and public access. Just basically take out that primarily serve students from the immediate community and.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work.
4. Moving right along.
So it says including bus-only drop-offs and pickups along street corridors with pathways to the facility. So I wasn't quite sure there. We're going to have bus priority, but we're still going to have some cars. And so we don't really have much in the way of street corridors.
Yeah, it sounded like what you described about Seattle having the bus drop-off and pickup happening on a public street is what's being described here. And I'm not sure if that was our thought process or intention. I don't know.
And it might have been back to mixing compact and urban. Maybe that could have been a thought in urban, even that,
Yeah.
that's not a great idea, but definitely not with compact.
Yeah.
So we
Strikes
do want
me
to
as-
separate buses and cars. So
The street corridor part is,
Including bus-only drop-offs and pickups with pathways to the facility?
right, so you remove the long street corridor, so we'd have our own lanes.
Yeah, I would eliminate the along street corridors with pathways to the facility because those should be up against the facility on your property. But you want to keep the idea of additional pathways from public transit stops. Do you want that in a compact school, or does that only apply to an urban school?
Right, it's not likely that you would have transit out in where we'd have compact schools that would be able
Yeah.
to bring in kids. And
Yeah.
I mean, if there is a public transit stop,
I mean, there's
a pathway from that to the school would be a good idea because perhaps staff transit to access the school. So
If we're planning for the future,
I think
there might
that's,
be a transit
I think that's
stop.
okay. I'm still a little bit unsure about designed as bus priority instead of car priority. That's okay, but including bus-only drop-offs and pickups, does that preclude having auto drop-off and pickup? Or does that mean that the bus pickup is supposed to be separate from the cars?
I think we were trying to figure out how you could continue the bus priority and make it easier to, if I'm a parent and I'm waiting a long time to drop off my kiddo, I would start thinking twice that maybe I should put my kiddo on the bus.
Right, but now
that
we're back
it's
out in those compact schools where we can't prevent parents from coming to
Right,
the
no, I
schools
know you
and coming
can't.
and
It's the
dropping
whole-
off and picking
It's the whole
up.
priority. It's like there's 2 left-hand turns at Second, and what if those were only bus? And so if you're the mom or the dad, you have to drive, you can't make the left there. You have to find a different way to get to the school because buses have priorities to get there. You know, that kind of thinking. Not that that wouldn't be a disaster for that corner.
Well,
but just
Second
the whole-
Avenue would back
The whole
up.
mindset of how do you how do you make it more incentives and make it easier for folks to ride the bus? At
That's,
least part of the
I see.
time. You can't always do it on the way home because you've got stuff going on, but,
in my mind, that's a balance between the idea that you want to minimize car traffic and make it a little more difficult for parents, but if we don't accommodate the parent traffic, we're going to back out up into the street, and the
Right.
street's going to be a problem.
Right.
And then we're not meeting the goal of trying to minimize our impact to the adjacent neighborhood.
right, right. Yeah, I'm not saying not accommodate them. I'm just trying to make the bus have more incentives to think of,
Yeah.
you know, that's really an okay way to do it.
So Trish, I like your description because I wasn't getting that from saying bus only drop off and pickups along street corridors. So being able to say something about incentivizing bus traffic or prioritize, how do you say that?
We can fiddle with it to make,
Yeah.
to
Traffic
make it more
control.
intent and,
Controlling the traffic?
Yeah.
Right, but that would be helpful because now when I do read it again, it says including bus-only drop-off pickups, as if you don't allow for any other drop-off and pickup. Right, but I can see trying to prioritize so that and we always, and actually we probably, for the most part, do, because we want to get those buses rolled in, and we do always want to make busing the most attractive way for kids to get to school.
Yeah,
Well-
and I'm sure you look at the schools around that have the highest busing rates and you go, what worked well there and how can we make that happen on other sites?
Yeah, so something that would allow for the drop-off and pickup with cars, but prioritize bus.
Right.
Rest is fine? We have one more. I would love to know what it says, because I can't read it.
It says, siting of compact and urban schools should reflect land scarcity by using smaller footprints on lots smaller than that
On a
of
different one?
recommended
Yeah,
state
I'm still-
minimum acreage, i.e. sites should be less than 5 usable acres. So we already discussed the idea of separating that out to make a suggestion for elementary versus middle versus high school.
I'm not even sure we should put a number in there.
I would just
So
like to-
we have an ARV goal, right? We have a density goal already. If the school district needs 10 acres for population, they have a density goal that's going to help fill that up, right? I don't know if we need a minimum number or,
So the reason to put a minimum number on it would be that these definitions of compact and urban schools have certain requirements and also certain benefits to the school district, such as being able to have a lot of impervious surface. Whereas if it was a larger site, we don't necessarily want to both give those away and put the same responsibilities on them that they would have to, you know, meet a certain FAR and, you know, have various other things. So there's a reason to have a minimum
so if they
and
choose a
maximum.
10-acre site, they don't have the same density goals as a 5-acre site?
Well,
no, I think what we're just trying to make them have the smallest footprint possible. And
Right.
so if they had 20 acres, maybe they would use 12 of them, and maybe the other 8 would be like a theater building that everybody can use, or they would find a way to use their land really efficiently for what they need it for, and maybe not use the whole piece. We're trying to figure out a way to say
Right.
that and
But there's
still
that
be a
density
incentive.
number that would control that, right? There's the usable space
No, well,
goal
the
of
FAR
2.0,
Right,
right?
the FAR, they can still use the whole site. We don't limit the size of the lot on that in a compact school. But we were thinking it might be a good idea for an urban school to try to limit the minimum lot size so that, so it's not a really big site that is sort of a sprawling kind of a thing, to try to make sure that we didn't, and not that we would, but just to sort of plan ahead that that's what makes it different. One of the reasons it's different than a compact school is it's even more smaller footprint, it's even more compact.
Okay.
so I think maximum acreage,
Or minimum.
Well, these are maximums.
No, this is a minimum.
This is minimum
Less
of
than
5. It sounds
five.
like we need a maximum as well
Well,
to
that's-
find a compact.
Less than would be a maximum.
Yeah,
Okay, right.
yeah.
Right, okay, yes, it's a maximum,
So
because it's
I
saying it
think
has to be less than.
Putting a maximum in there
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah.
is a real challenge.
So is the state minimum acreage, is that what you're coming up with, the 5 acres?
No, the cities
No.
are very high.
They're 10, 20, and 40.
40 for a high school.
Okay.
So the challenge becomes even, so the site that we're looking at to put a high school and an elementary school on, we're going to fill up the whole site. But there's going to be probably about 4 acres of that site along the roadway that's on a steep slope. And we want to preserve the trees there. And we're not going to build there because A, it's not feasible.
Right.
But if you put a maximum acreage on it, well, maybe it doesn't work anymore.
Well, this is usable acres,
Right.
so that would account for that. But I completely agree that 5 usable acres is not the number that we need.
I think the reality of the world we live in is that, there aren't any sites that are just going to allow you to go out and buy 40 acres, and we don't have the money to develop more than what we need to anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, a more compact footprint building is more economical to build than a one-story spread out old California campus plan.
Right.
A lot more energy efficient. That drives us to build a more compact footprint and compact perimeter or exterior area of a building. I think it's just a challenge because, again, if you go back to the PCMS site, it's 45 acres, but it's 19 usable. And what if we found a site that was 20 acres, but we had a 10-acre maximum on it? Do we not buy it because you won't let us build on it? Because it's bigger?
No, I think
We have to subdivide it?
I think we would try to figure out a way that, like the 45 and the 19 would be within that window of, because there's 2 schools there. But I think if the other scenario, you said if it's 20 and it's all buildable and you're just putting a smaller school on it, maybe you put part of it, in a native growth protection easement or something to keep the landscaping, to keep the tree canopy, so that it's not 90% impervious over the whole 20 acres. It's,
I
and
mean,
not that
it
you
wouldn't behoove
would.
us to clear the extra land and pave it
Right,
for no purpose.
right. I think we're just trying to figure out how do we have that as our aspirational thought, is that they are smaller and taller and compact, and how do you say that aspirationally without tying your hands?
Well, I think it says that in the first part, on lots smaller than that of recommended minimum acreages.
Right.
Leave it at
We're
that.
going to reflect the land scarcity by using smaller footprints on lots smaller than that recommended state minimum acreage.
Well, it does say should, it doesn't say shall, and it's not tied to a development regulation either.
Quite
So-
honestly,
Right, yeah.
policy G6 talks more about what we're talking about, which is using the least amount of land and building up instead of out. So I think we address those things. We just need to
To not have a
figure
number.
out if we're going to eliminate the site should be less than 5 usable acres or replace it with some kind of recommendation for each of the different types of schools.
Yeah, because the standards, once the standards are written, they can be with all kinds of options available. I mean, we don't have any standards right now, but what if there was a standard that said something around 5 acres with some sort of exceptions allowed for this or for that, or with, some other options available should a site come up that's more than that? I mean,
Does that really accomplish much, other than putting the burden on planning staff to, at a future point?
Because we know it wouldn't be realistic for anything but an elementary school if we're still keeping 5 acres, because you could, putting a middle school and high school on 5 acres.
Unless you did more of those alternative schools like Gibson or something like that.
They don't house very many.
Yeah.
That houses like less than 200 kids. So we have what, over 6,000 high school kids. As we go to build a new high school, the high school we want to build is going to have to handle at least 1,600 kids. So there's a huge difference in the size of those types of schools.
Yeah, well, yeah, a school that size realistically doesn't sound compact. It couldn't be compact.
It's compact
compact
for that type of school.
Yeah, it is for that type of school versus the old Issaquah High School, which was 1 story and all the way spread out and covered all the space where now Issaquah High School and Issaquah Middle School were. Well, we had Clark in there too, so. But so that's a very different design to now have a 3-story Issaquah High School and a 3-story Issaquah Middle School that used to all be 1 story. So I'm getting confused on these, on even like on the G3 and 4. Were you changing it so that that was just referencing compact schools?
Right, I think
Okay,
that
The
so
whole
even-
section,
The whole thing, so even G5 is just about compact? Okay, just wanted to make sure.
yeah.
So if it's truly aspirational, is there something in between what Bill and Lindsay was saying, whereas G6 kind of is the aspirational goal, and then to Bill's point, you strike less than 5, shall be less than 5?
Yeah.
And that kind of, it frees up their hands. Now, we basically have put our aspirational policy goal, which is that they will develop the land to the best of their abilities up.
I think,
I think there's 2 ways to do it. You can use the second policy, the G6, to do that, or you can put, guidelines or, some kind of wiggle word that says, generally, elementaries can be on 7 acres of usable land, middle schools 11 and 12, and high schools at 20, which states what less than the state minimum or minimum is, and yet has guidelines that you sort of gave us, so that everyone's in the same ballpark. Not to
I think
use a pun.
G6 really kind of solves the whole thing, because compact school design should use the least amount of land for development and supporting infrastructures that's reasonable under the circumstances by building up, using nearby parks, recreational facilities when available, and using,
Yeah.
I think that takes care of the whole thing. It's the least amount of land necessary to support the facility.
So Trish, my concern with putting a requirement of, a small requirement of acres in G5 is that the school district would face a decision in trying to decide whether or not to buy a lot that was, say, 10 acres for an elementary school if they're not sure that they're going to get that exemption or that allowance to be able to build on that, even if they were intending to follow G6.
I mean, the reality of that situation would be that we would have to put a contract on a piece of land we're interested in with a very long feasibility period to know that we would get through the planning process and get a variance to build on a bigger piece of property. Otherwise, we'd buy a piece of property that we couldn't use. It'd be like King County changing the rules.
Right. Well, yeah, if you want to get rid of the number, we can.
Yes.
How does the state minimum work? What is that? Can you explain that?
It's big.
And for an elementary, 20, I believe it is for a middle school, and 40.
I wish Keith was here. 'cause
So the state says you can't build a high school on less than 40 acres.
they're-
Yeah. Now, those
It's general.
were established years and years ago.
Okay.
They do allow you to argue your point if you want to build a school on a smaller parcel.
So how does that work if we have you build a compact school on 5 acres and that violates the state minimum? What's that process for getting, you have a variance with the state now, right? Or
We're going through OSBI, then we have to show them that we can adequately provide for a high school on 30 acres or 27 acres or whatever it is.
okay. Do you see any challenges with that process going forward?
Not been an issue in the past.
So it says recommended state minimum acreage. Is it set in stone, or is it just a recommendation?
Recommended minimums.
Yes, so it could
Flexibility
be,
to argue your
you can
point.
work with it. You just have to do more legwork, more paperwork, more
Yep.
time-consuming money. Okay, so we're fine with that?
Did you decide to cross out the 5 acres?
the-
Okay, I was
right.
just trying to make sure I knew.
7.
Okay,
Oh,
on
let's
6.
go back
Yeah.
up to the end of 6.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We'll share parks and recreational facilities when they're available. Pretty rare, but we'll share ours with you. Avoiding the use of portables and modular units is a little problematic. There have been some state OSPI proposals. You require the use of modular units in building schools. They are often aligned towards prototype schools and through with various different suggestions that we don't necessarily agree with, that a prototype school is contradictory to it's contradictory to compact schools for one thing. But one school for all for Eastern Washington, Western Washington, every school district is not really appropriate. They do sometimes come by with and could end up implementing, requiring the use of modular units. And we use portables, and I know they become somewhat permeables, but funding isn't always available. And we know that even in the 4 schools that we build, we will not eliminate the need for portables.
Right, if we hadn't had portables, we wouldn't have been able to manage through the growth while we've been trying to acquire land and build schools since we passed the bond in 2016.
So
Portables are a really important part of us being able to manage the growth before we can build the new schools.
so minimize is a nicer word than avoid.
So I think one of the ideas here is to avoid opening a new school that already has a need for portables. And
We have that same goal, and we would love to open new schools and not have to put portables in for a while, but when it takes 2 years to acquire a piece of property, we've got another 1,000 kids in the district that you have to accommodate, so
And you also have to remember that the only way we have the money to build schools is to pass a bond, of which we need our voters to help us do, right? So we don't, so it's quite a planning process to be able to see the growth, identify where it is, put together a plan that goes out and takes it to our voters to pass a bond that gives us the money to be able to go out and acquire the land and build the school.
Can we just say minimizing the use of portables?
Sure.
I mean, I know you're going to use them at some point in time, and there's a reason at times, but to minimize the use of them, would that?
Before, when you design an elementary school, do you leave a footprint for portables, correct?
We do,
That's
so
built in the design.
initial site approval accommodates potential use of portables and that the stormwater drainage facilities are sized for that so that when the need arises, and we typically find out from the schools what their projections are in the spring, and when a school gets to a point where they need more classroom space, we get told that X elementary needs another 2 classrooms. We need to have a portable in place for September when school opens, and we'll find out in the spring. So we put those 4 portable pads in on the original planning documents so that all the surface water, storm drainage issues are already designed in, taken care of. So we're really just looking at a building permit for that building instead of having to go through a whole new site approval process, which would take longer than the summer.
So I understand that portables are a very cost-effective and flexible way to add and take away capacity, but I think the intent of the compact and urban schools is to look at using land in a more dense manner, and the idea of just setting aside open space for small one-story buildings, I'm not sure if that fits the spirit of what we're trying to get to with these policies. In a suburban environment, definitely, that makes total sense to set aside a small part of the school footprint for portables so that we have the flexibility. But I'm trying to think through if I'm not sure if that meets what we're trying, of the type of structures that we're trying to promote with these policies.
Was there anywhere in Issaquah you could build a suburban school? Because I thought that compact and what covered everything with urban school covering central Issaquah. So as far as I can tell, there is no such thing as a suburban school allowed in the city of Issaquah.
Right.
So AJ, to
So
bring you.
to us, that's a compact school now.
Okay, no, that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead,
To bring
Lindsay.
you up to speed, we had kind of decided that in the policy G area, where it does currently address compact and urban schools, that we need to kind of break it apart and put urban schools back up into the higher area where we had kind of talked about that. And so this area would end up being primarily compact schools. That being said, I think what you're stating about the building idea for particularly an urban school wouldn't necessarily present space for that one story or even blank land waiting for that.
That might be true in the urban.
And it's going to be true in some of the compact school sites. Tallis site probably won't have space for 4 double portables for future use.
Will or will not?
Be some spaces where the sites are just too tight to do that.
So in a situation like that, do you build the school to have empty classrooms?
Accommodate overflow.
No, because we don't have money to
Yeah.
build empty space.
We've already passed the bond that's given us the money to build these schools to a certain size and capacity.
So if the money, you're getting the money before you know what the lot is going to look like, and therefore you're going to have variances there to use the money in different ways to build up, higher here, wider there. It's going to have cost variations.
There will be, but we're also buying land and building 4 new schools, right? So you have that variation, and there may be some, but we also have to make sure we have enough money to build the other 2 elementary schools, the high school, and that middle school.
Bear in mind
answer
that the
better.
cost of construction inflation on the high school and elementary project is about $500,000 a month.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. That's why it's really challenging when it takes 2 years to get through a process.
That's nothing to sneeze at.
No.
No.
So
But these
Part of the-
policies aren't just for this bond, it's also trying to lay out policies so that when you guys do your next bond, because we're going to need more schools, you can have good policies that are in place so that when you sketch out your bond, you guys know what you're dealing with too, so.
But again, if you go back to the bond process and say on this next elementary school, we can't put portables in, so we need another 8 classrooms and funding, we need another $10 million bond for that school. You do that, you may not get the bond approved, and you may not have any money to build a school. So
Yeah.
it's always a challenge to find that sort of sweet spot where you think you're going to get enough money to do all that you need. You build in some level of inflation factor. You hope that the cost of construction isn't going up as fast as it is currently. But we can't put in more than what's really necessary. And we never get a bond approved until they're really seeing the whites of their eyes. It's never...
It's a challenging act, because on the flip side, if we build schools and had empty space, we would hear the negative, you overbuilt, you spent too much money, you came to us for too much money. So all I'm saying is it's a challenge to find the right amount, to plan for it, and we plan for how many kids are coming, we plan for how many buildings to build, and find that sweet spot to go out and pass a bond with our voters.
What do you do in the meantime with the students? Do they just go to a different school?
Well, in the meantime, we've been using portables to
right.
accommodate that extra growth.
And when it does get to a point where it is simply too many kids in one school, we do change the boundaries and try to balance with the schools that are next to it.
If you have space there.
But if there's space, because they're already probably getting full, right? And so it's kind of balancing that fullness of the schools while we're trying to get to the point where we can bring new schools online and reset everything to a better place. And then traditionally, if the growth just continues to happen, then we refill them again.
And so in this last bond issue, we also had classroom additions at 6 different schools. So we've finished additions at Sunset and Cougar Ridge that opened this last September. And Discovery and Endeavor will get classroom additions that will open the next September. So when you get to a point where you've already filled up all the portable space at a school and you still see that there's growth coming, then that gets to be an issue that goes on to the bond, and so we'll make those schools bigger. But when you do that, you also have to make some of the supporting space bigger, because you got to feed more kids in lunch, and you don't want to have 4 lunches. I mean, eating lunch all day long. So you got to make the commons bigger and the multipurpose room bigger, and
So we're never going to get to a point
factoring
where,
in. The other thing that we've been doing on our recent schools is providing space at the end of a classroom wing for the potential of a future addition. So those, we're trying to be efficient and forward-looking, because we know that in the future there's availability of land is going to be even more scarce and expensive than it is today.
so I don't think you're ever going to get to a place where you will never use a portable. And I don't think it should be eliminated in there.
So again, the word minimize instead of avoiding?
Minimize or something to try. It's better than you can't build it at all.
Yeah. I like stretch goals, but a lot of it sounds like the policies here are not in full control of what causes a portable in the first place.
Right.
So, yeah, minimize or remove it altogether.
I mean, that is the goal, is to minimize them, but if there's too many kids, you got to do something with them, and so you might need a portable.
I think what AJ was saying, particularly about urban schools, though, is that maybe we should address the idea that an urban school doesn't necessarily provide space for portable units.
I think that would be a self-fulfilling goal. But if you wanted to go back up into the core area and talk there, I suppose that would be okay. But I think the reality is that those are going to be very, very compact footprints, and you're not going to have floor area, a land area for
Yeah,
portables.
I don't think you need to add that in, but it's up to you.
I think it should be in a policy for an urban school to say that the land isn't going to be used that way. And I really appreciate hearing that you've already thought toward that, and that's great.
But it's good to have the nudge from both the policy side and from the financial side. You're speaking to the financial need to not have portables, but it's good to also have it from the policy side, just to ensure it doesn't happen.
So, may I ask a clarifying point, Chair, about this? The words "and avoiding the use of portables and modular units" would be moved to the urban schools policies, or just simply changed to minimize in the compact school policies, or both?
Right, I have an extra policy would be put into urban.
As a minimize or avoid?
I would
Should not
modify
allow space.
this G6 to say minimize, and then add a new policy just for urban schools that says avoid.
I don't know if it needs, I don't know if we need the word minimize, because you have the word reasonable. So using nearby public parks, we're not requiring that they use nearby public parks and nearby recreation facilities. So I read the avoiding the use of portable and modular units also is modified by the word reasonable.
But it says avoid. That's a pretty clear definition of a word, and that is no.
I don't think reasonable actually applies toward the end of the sentence there. It says supporting infrastructure that is reasonable.
I don't think it hurts having minimizing in there, the use of portables.
You could put reasonable use of portables.
And modular units, whatever.
I think this is an important point. I mean, I understand saying that it's very expensive to build a school with empty spaces and that your bond hasn't allowed that, but in the Planning Policy Commission, we're thinking out 20, 30, 40 years. And so we need to address this for that period of time beyond this current bond. And thinking about how we want our schools to be built without portable units, because that has been such a pervasive thing in the city of Issaquah.
So what would happen is that if you can't use portables on a compact school site in Issaquah, and that school gets full, your boundaries are going to be readjusted and your kids are going to get bused to some other school.
Yep.
But you're not saying for compact, though, you're saying urban.
No, I think we have said for urban, it doesn't make sense to use portables at all because you're going to have to build out to the full site. For compact,
Minimize.
I still, yes, minimize, but I also just want to have that conversation. Say, we'd like that to do more.
I don't like portables either, but
I don't like seeing a school launched with portables is,
that becomes a timing issue.
and a communication issue with the city on what the projected housing is, so that when you're creating your bond, you're doing it using that kind of future planning data that says, we're going to have 2,000 extra houses in central Issaquah that we're going to have to,
And how many kids are going to come out of those 2,000 houses?
So if you take it out completely, out of that sentence, what does that do for you? What does it do?
That would
doesn't
worry-
hold them to a standard
Yeah, that would
of
worry me to take it out.
minimizing portable.
Yeah, I would rather say it and say minimize, just so that it recognizes that you talked about it.
Well, that's where I am. I'm just trying to.
I
I'm
wish
hearing
there was
different things.
something different between avoiding and minimize that stresses something. I'm fine with minimize, I just, it's a point of frustration.
It's also frustrating for the school district to have kids that they don't know what to do with. So, I mean, you can't win either way,
Yes,
basically.
but that would be solved by building schools that address the future needs, even if that does mean that there's potential criticism for overbuilding.
Well, if there's enough criticism, you don't get the bonds passed, which there will not be schools, so.
So I mean, the reality is the unintended consequences, you would either have larger class sizes or the kids will be bused somewhere else.
It sounds like the middle ground is Steve would like avoiding stricken out completely, and it sounds like Lindsay would kind of like to at least have minimize or something in there as aspirational
I
for
think
you
minimize
guys.
is fine.
Minimize is fine.
Yeah, I think we try. I realize you don't think we do, but we,
No, I'm not saying that. I
Yeah.
just
yeah.
want to look at a larger time period.
When we open our new schools, hopefully we will be able to.
Yeah, I think if we had a new policy that's just tailored around the urban schools where we say we're going to avoid, that gets us beyond where we are today.
Yep.
I'm okay if you
Okay.
would avoid in one of these other
Yeah.
urban policies,
urban
and
policy.
create
Central
a separate
Issaquah.
one, or however you want to do
And then
it.
compact is what? Minimize?
Minimize.
So is there anything in G7?
I think it's great.
Seems like we've covered this before in other ones. Maybe I'm wrong. We just backed
I
up
don't see
once. Never
anything
mind.
there that's really
If there's anything
objectionable.
in there that
No, nothing's out of the ordinary.
is a problem?
No.
last one is just asking about the standards. The last page.
While Tricia's looking that over, when was the last time a bond got rejected by the city? Or by the district?
Voters?
Yeah, by the voters for a school expansion.
Back in the late 90s.
Okay.
Would you agree? I mean,
Yep.
yeah.
88.
There was one that was, went down and then you did it again and it passed.
Well, I think it took 3 tries on that at that time and finally passed it. And again, I don't know if it was 99 or 2000, but right in that window. Because again, schools were just so crowded that we were finally able to get it passed. And then we worked very hard to deliver on all the things we promised we will do in those bonds, all the projects, so that we have the voter confidence for the next bond and the next bond. And so.
Because the last 2 or 3 have been improved, all in the 2000s.
And yes, because we passed them in 2006, 2012, 2016. Maybe there was one in 2002. We're going back farther than I can keep them straight.
It's probably a challenging environment now post light rail or sound transit increase, which was a big chunk of change.
Sure. Yeah, you'll get some tax fatigue at a certain point.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, and it's a balance between what we'd like to have. And the 2012 bond was focused all on modernization, and we needed funds to bring older schools up to date, and it didn't include any new space. 2016 basically focused all on new space because we and the community could see that there's a whole heck of a lot of new housing units coming on board. We need that space.
The reality is, it has taken us much longer to acquire the land and then build the schools than we ever could have imagined.
But you're doing a good job, the high school and the
Well,
middle
the high
school.
school and the middle school are fabulous.
It's
The
awesome.
ones that we have. But I mean, in acquiring the land for the new high school and middle school, it's still a work in progress.
But the middle school was done.
Not a new middle school that we've not built.
We
We're
rebuilt.
working on acquiring land.
We rebuilt Pine Lake Middle School.
Okay.
It was in Laura.
I thought the middle school is going to take over the old headquarters site. I thought is that not a done deal? Is that still being worked through?
So current planning is that we would retain the current administration site for the future to have some land available to address the core area development that we see coming, that you are planning for, and look for another middle school site. Current first choice is the Talus site at the bottom of the hill below the retirement.
Okay.
Not a done deal yet.
Sure.
So,
Okay, future.
I didn't know if we wanted to talk to Steve and Ann about what regulations they might envision for urban schools that would be higher, more dense than the compact that we have, or if you're all set for tonight. We thought this could be a fun time to just sort of launch that next conversation on how dense are urban schools.
okay, so 65 feet.
So 65 feet only really allows 3 stories. So if you're going to build on a flat site in the urban core area, it needs to be higher than that.
So in the core, urban core, the height, building height is what?
125.
That's what I thought.
You can build an 8-story office building. I don't see why there can't be an 8-story school
That's what I'm getting
across the
at.
street.
Yep. So Trish, we have a table that talks about standards for public schools. Would it be possible to create 2 different tables, one for urban, one for
Right,
compact?
so but this is the compact one, because it's all there is. And so we would have a new line that then separated urban and compact, but I wanted to give you this so you saw what you were dealing with now for compact. And then see how much more dense you would be okay with for urban. for what
Okay,
you're
so
bringing this year.
if the buildings around it are 125 feet,
Well, that's only in the core. The other parts of Central is not, that's just the highest you can be in Central is 125. Trying to think of the other, north of it. But it's a range. I suppose it's,
Yeah, why can't it be 65 feet or surrounding zoning, whichever's higher?
I would,
Well, that's
Or-
what we got away from when we actually made contact school regulations, because they used to have to meet the zoning, I'm sorry, they used to have to meet the zoning. Oh, it turned me off, sorry. We used to have to meet the zoning of the zone next to you, and so everything was super low, super suburban,
That's what
so
I'm
that's
saying,
why we
60
created this.
65 or neighboring zones if those are higher than 65.
Not neighboring buildings,
Oh,
neighboring.
okay.
So the idea is if it's in a neighborhood that allows 90 feet or 125, it can do that.
Right,
But if it's in a single-family zone, then 65 is fine.
right. And to ask it another way, Steve and Ann, can you imagine how, I mean, I know you can't see totally into the future, 20, 30 years, but how high do you think a school can be and still be an effective school? Like, do elevators get in the way of your building, or it can't be more than 8 stories because of,
it takes a paradigm shift of school use, because you will be using elevators to transport kids, which
right,
we currently limit.
right.
It becomes an interesting question. There are schools in urban areas around the world that are 6 or 8 or 9 stories tall.
Right.
You have more supervision issues and such, and it's just something that you look at dealing with in the future. I think as far as at this time, planning for heights in the urban core, or the urban core plus the central core, matching the adjacent heights, if they're higher than 65 feet, makes sense. I don't really know what'll happen
Okay, that's fair.
15 years
No,
from now.
that's fair.
But I think that that's a reasonable place to go.
How would that even work? Would you just kind of schedule the kids around their classes only being on 2 floors of the 9 or 8 floors, or?
Well, it would
Because
depend
I've
if
been
it was
in
an
like the
elementary
middle school during
school,
walkabout, and
right.
it's madness when you
Right.
have, the school, like, unlike other building, you have a large amount of humans walking every, 45 minutes, 50 minutes to a different location on cadence.
Your vertical circulation space has to become bigger to transport the kids.
And very
and
wide
You're going to
staircases.
look at trying to consolidate grade spans to minimize the travel pass. You're going to have probably only indoor recreation facilities, and in those areas, hopefully there's some park space adjacent. But you're probably going to have a gym that's indoors, and you may have a fenced-in area on the roof that's your outdoor play area. It's going to be pretty compact. But at that point, if you're drawing from the local community, then you're drawing from a group of people who moved into the urban area, and they came with some visions and expectations of what that urban life looks like. It would be different, I think, than what the majority of people are looking for their school-age kids' experience in school that are moving into the Issaquah area today.
I can't see a grade school, well, any school, more than 4 or 5 stories, because the kids are going to have to walk up and down the steps. They're not going to be able to take the elevator. It would be impossible. It would be
Yeah.
a madhouse.
Yeah, you'd probably put first floor on the bottom and fifth,
Yeah, you either break it up by
Fifth
grade, or maybe on the top
Yeah,
floor
so
it's just
that one grade
administrative
is always on
offices or something like that, or you've got a top floor that's in open air, courts and playgrounds.
Gym up there,
Yeah,
right.
there's things you can do. So I went to a 4,000 person high school that was 5 buildings. One of them was 4 stories. We had a 10-minute passing period, and if you had to get from math to, I think it was English, you just had to hoof it. And you had 10 minutes to hustle to get from one side to the other, and we made it work.
training for college, really.
Yeah, it's just like
Right.
it's just like going to a community. My high school is basically like a community college from a logistics standpoint. Yeah, it worked fine.
My grandkids go to a 8-story building, but there's only 5 classrooms, 5 stories. They're not allowed to take the elevator. They have to walk up and down the steps, so they get their
Healthy
exercise.
hearts, yeah.
Yeah, they
It's
get
good
their
exercise
exercise
for
on the way
'em.
up and down the steps. But any more than that, I think would be unreasonable to unless you had grades on.
What about a building that wasn't entirely a school? You could have something that, maybe the bottom 2 schools are an elementary, and then the top 3 schools are like the school district office, something like that. Or it doesn't. The point is, the building doesn't all need to be a
We've
school.
considered models where the first 3 floors would be school, and you might have an administration building, offices on top of that. Mixing public use with school becomes a challenge.
Sure.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep. But you could do something like library on top with a different entrance or something. There are other ways to think about it.
I mean, your school might start on level 2 if you had retail and commercial in the ground floor, but we'd have a separate access off of another space. And it might be 4 stories or 5, but in total, the building might be taller.
I think parents would appreciate having a coffee shop on the bottom floor of their
be.
kids' school. Yes, very much so.
Is there a requirement for kindergartners to be on the first floor, though?
Yeah, because they're nuts.
You're getting way
That's-
off subject.
Now we're designing the school, I love it.
There was a code requirement that primary grades had to have direct ground level egress. The new code doesn't require that, the new IBC, but there are still some jurisdictions that hold to the old interpretation and require primary grades to have direct access to grade. So, State of Issaquah would probably be more forward-thinking, I think.
Yes, I'm sure we would be. I'm not sure. That'd be up to the building.
Do you want to
code.
move on to the next question?
So you're comfortable with height based on what is zoned around it?
Yeah, because that would allow the district to design the school
Okay.
to what they felt was appropriate. I mean, it
Okay.
could be a high school, and maybe that's looked at a little differently.
So setbacks, could an urban school ever have 0 setbacks from side or rear?
Yeah.
So I was reading this yesterday, and basically, if you're in a subdivision, houses, and your lot line is 5 feet away from the house, you're able to build that school right on that property line.
Well,
You have a build-to
Usually
line,
it's up
though,
to
still.
street.
Yeah, you usually have a
edge.
build-to line that's 15 feet.
there's a build-to
from
line,
your-
and there's a front, rear, and side on the
Okay.
compact school criteria currently,
Right.
but it also has a footnote that says if it's adjacent to residential areas, it has to meet the adjacent residential setback.
Okay, as long as that's covered, because I read that and I thought, well, gee, that's not cool.
So, yeah, I would anticipate that any residential you would be looking at in the urban core is
Would be
multi-story
high density,
as
right.
well.
Yep.
So does this need to be updated for the side and rear? So for urban it's 0 rather than 7?
That's what I'm writing down is for when we float the urban standards next year, that we can at least start with this conversation of what the numbers would be.
That's what prompted me to
Oh.
say what I did, because it's 0.
Yeah. Are there?
Well, it's 7 now, it's
There-
7
that-
side and 7 rear.
That
No, she's saying
brings-
for the urban.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
and-
0 from urban, right,
I mean,
Yeah, and the build-to line.
or it could be.
I'd say it's possible. That brings into the question of how are we getting kids to the school, and where is pickup, drop-off, where do buses pick up, drop off?
So does that mean
Is it
you'd
in an
still,
urban grid system where we can share the street? If we have to provide for those transportation ingress egress situations outside of the street system, then there's going to have to be some setback from the property line that allows that to happen. So, yeah, it's possible.
Overhanging second floors so that buses can drive underneath.
That might be an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any security concerns in this day and age with maybe needing more space for, frontline security or perimeter security around the building, or?
Well, I'm envisioning that this is going to be a building in which the kids are contained inside. So once they're in the building, they're safe and secure.
It also have to be consideration for kids being dropped off before school, and where do kids wait when school, because normally they go wait in the front or wait in the back of the school, but if the school is built to the outer lines, where do the kids wait? Now,
Yeah. So when
Does it-
kids come to school, they don't typically access through the front door. They're typically lining up, and we use our covered play areas as staging areas. And they stage typically around
Right
the
by the
back
doors.
of the building and enter into the classrooms a few minutes before class time. That they stage on the play area and burn off a little energy before school starts. Because staff don't want 500, 600 kids running around the building for 20 minutes
Right.
before school starts. They're outside in the.
There are obviously urban schools in Seattle that have addressed that problem, so.
And then I've seen some schools where they have like a large commons area.
I think there can be value in moving the setback to 0, but then having some flexibility in the build to line, with understanding that schools are unique, and having some language allowing some flexibility in the build to, that the school might want to have some kind of atypical setbacks for staging areas or bus drop-offs or
Right.
whatnot.
That's what I was going to ask Steve directly. Is 0 to 20 still okay for urban? I mean, I heard all the what-ifs, but I didn't hear if 20 is too small or just enough or flexible enough. Because, yeah, I was going where you were going, AJ. I wanted to know what,
If the property line or at the back of the sidewalk and you had a drop-off lane, it would be.
No, in the front.
It'd be 20.
because I thought we said the side and the rear could be 0, but I was worried about the front. Is 0 to 20 still okay for the front? A build-to line?
Well,
Because of the drop-off and the weather protection
Is
and all
this
those
side and
things?
rear a build to or a setback?
A setback,
So there is no side or rear build to.
correct.
It's on the front, column 4.
It's only in the front is.
Oh, it'd be really nice if you had a build-to of 0 to 20 all the way around.
Well, no, there is no, that's my point. There is no build to on the side or rear. So you don't have to build out.
But it has a,
So a setback is how much you have to set back. And so if it's 0, you either can set back or you don't need to. But there's no side or rear build to. So if you want to set back, you're allowed to. The only place you're not allowed to set back is more than 20 feet on the front.
would be okay.
Yeah.
So 0 to 20 is okay, and then 0 for side, 0 for rear setback is still okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they still have there's no side or rear build to, so if you guys want to have a side setback for
Yeah.
bus
Right.
layovers or whatever,
Right.
that's still allowed. It's not required, but still allowed.
Building over the top of it.
Yep.
Minimum lot size, less than 5 usable acres, we're back to that.
No, I think we've already addressed that idea.
To not to go there just yet?
Yeah.
And we've looked at the sharing facilities, so is
Yep.
there anything else that the school district thinks that we need to discuss?
Do you need a bigger FAR than 2 for urban?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we have issues with the FAR on the
The minimum now for
compact
compact?
schools.
So we
Okay.
have issues for compact, issues for urban. So,
So I haven't done any calculations on an urban FAR of 0.75, but I think that that's probably doable.
Okay.
And maximum of 2, again, if it's consistent with all of the other urban policy adjacent, that's probably okay and appropriate.
Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah,
we
same
allow
approach as the
for-
height,
Yeah, we allow for higher FARs
if that's allowed in
in
the
like the
zone,
urban core,
Okay.
so.
similar to the height. That makes
Yep.
sense.
Higher than 2?
Yeah. So it's similar to
In the
being.
urban
So no,
core.
maybe no
surrounding zone.
maximum FAR, or what were you
No, I
saying?
think we
What's the
have
adjacent zone
maximums,
if
so
it's
we just
Like a 3,
allow-
Match
like a
it.
mixed,
Yeah.
right.
Match.
So it's 2 or greater if the zoning allows for more.
Yeah.
Similar to 65
Same as
or
the height
greater,
they were
Yeah.
if that's what's allowed.
Yeah, that's good.
So the FAR on the compact school sites is a problem.
Yeah.
And you don't count recreational space, and you don't count structured parking space. I can see that in a commercial type, or maybe even a residential situation, you would want to maximize the square footage of the commercial space, so to maximize the square footage of the residential, and you wouldn't count the structured parking. For us, that's kind of counterproductive to getting to an FAR, because we're going to build the square footage that the school needs to be, and if we don't have to count the structured parking square footage, we're not going to get another 50,000 square feet of retail space or leasable space or 12 more units. And not taking a playfield recreational space out of the lot area is really problematic, because a typical track and field area is it's close to 4.5 acres. And so if we run FARs on a middle school on the Talus site, which is basically utilizing 90% of that site, it's really, really dense, we're under about 0.5. And if you look at the high school site, which is using structured parking and compact footprint building, but has football field, soccer track, baseball field, softball, and an elementary school with some playfield area, that's running at about 0.2.
I think when we took that FAR stuff up, I don't know whether we were really separating out the idea of compact and urban schools. And I think
No,
when
were
we
just
had our
talking-
meeting.
We were just wanting to know what the existing schools were, knowing
Yeah.
that none of them are really fit
Yeah.
the category yet.
So when we had our meeting last time, we kind of looked at some of the schools, and I think that kind of shocked us into the idea of, 0.75 is probably too high for compact schools. And I appreciate that you're saying it's probably doable for an urban school.
And that's
So-
primarily because for an urban school, you're not having recreation space that's just
Right.
on the land.
On an
Yeah.
urban school, we're really, other than maybe an interior gym, we're not going to be providing recreational outdoor space or community use.
Why does the city not want to define the recreational space as part of the square footage? What's the thought process behind that?
We have never counted parking as part of the FAR.
like
So we
fields.
it just seemed to be, it's an open space, so we weren't.
So I've
gonna
got an
count it.
idea. I think if the open space is for public use, the kind of space that like when school's not in session, people can run on the track, I think it makes sense to exclude that from the FAR calculation. Because in that case, what it really is it's no different than if there was a city-owned park that then the school was using during school session. It's just school owns it, and then when school's not in session, the public's using it. So I think as a potentially nice carrot to incentivize the school to build soccer fields and baseball fields that then can be used by public outside of school usage, I think it would make, as a suggestion, modifying this so it's 0.75, but excluding recreational space. Because I think there's still merit to having things like parking, trying to incentivize the school to keep that stuff compressed. But I think for recreational space, I think if the school is creating what's effectively open space, I mean, there might be, some seating or some lighting, but it's open space. I think there's value to, even in a
that's one way to
compact
do it.
environment, there's value to creating that green space.
So in the commercial and residential world, not counting the structured parking space is an incentive to them. For us, counting that would be an incentive to put more of the parking into the structured space.
More than 50%, more than the requirement?
Well, I'm just saying, if you're trying to meet an FAR and you're not going to count it, there's no incentive to go higher. If it does count against an FAR, it could be.
That's
I'm
true.
not saying that we would, because I recall that when we talked about structured parking, it was 25%, and I was surprised to see that it got written as 50.
I think the 50 is only for urban, correct?
No,
Or is it?
50's for compact schools,
Okay.
because that's all we have now. That's the only regs we have now.
Sure.
Right, and even that seemed, as he was looking back at it, to be awfully high.
Just a side note, though, that should be a minimum of 50%, not just shall
Right, that went
provide.
into the last amendments that you'll see on the
Okay.
15th.
Similar, since we're not looking to make decisions on this right now, similar to how you guys presented some of the existing schools and communicated what the FAR was, I think it'd be really interesting to show that same analysis and subtract out the recreational space.
Yeah.
Say, hey, these are the FARs with and without, and just see how much that moves the needle. And that might give us a really good data point to figure out whether or not 0.75 is good.
We can do that.
I think that'd be really
That
the
would
way
be
to drive the
great, yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
Because if you can point and say, hey, yeah, the Tallis site, the new high school site, if you exclude recreational space, we're landing at like 1.2, for example, whatever. Then we might say, oh, okay, so
Yeah.
0.75 seems reasonable.
And especially if that moves the needle from some of the earlier sites that you built that maybe are a little bit more spread out. If we look at the FAR on that and go, oh, it only achieved a 0.5 even when we take the recreational space out, and the newer ones are going more toward that 1.2 idea, that shows us progress that meets this idea of good use of the land and compact siting and all of that we're looking for.
So just as a rough example, on the high school elementary site, to meet a .75 FAR, we'd have to build 4 high schools and 4 elementary schools on that site.
Do it.
Comply.
Absolutely.
You got the money for that? Because I'll take that check.
And we wouldn't need to build portables.
Fantastic. Yeah.
It's one problem.
We've
Do you
solved the
know
future.
ballpark that if you exclude the recreational space, what the FAR would be? Or do you have to say?
On that on
Yeah,
the-
and you'd also have to look at usable land versus the whole site as
Yeah, and that
well.
was just taking the gross acreage times .75 and
Trying to figure out how much
by the
building you're building.
340,000 square feet of building that we're going to put there,
Yeah.
which is still a pretty significant area.
Yeah.
So does this come back for a public hearing?
The policies and the 2 definitions will come back on the 13th of December amidst your whole comprehensive plan amendments. Will all come back on that day. Remember, we postponed, we bumped it so that we could have this discussion, but they will all come back to you in December for that public hearing. Your next 2 meetings in November are both public hearings. On that November 8th is a public hearing of the Level 3 review in Central. And Emily will be in charge of that public hearing. That should be a fascinating night. Don't miss it.
A joint meeting?
Yes, the beginning part of it will be the Gilman Corridor Open House with the Development Commission. And we've also invited the Development Commission to stay for the public hearing on Level 3 review because it affects them, because they're the ones that do the Level 3 reviews.
Which night was that?
That's the 8th.
8th of November, here at 6:30. And then the 15th, which is the next week, so you don't have to meet on Thanksgiving, that's when we're going to look at not municipal facilities anymore, institutional, what did we change it to? Institutional buildings, institutional facilities. That's when we'll have the continuation of that meeting.
At Pickering.
Pickering, right?
Oh, yes, in
I see.
Pickering, over in the, and we'll try and make sure the computers work this time.
Calling it institutional facilities worries me.
That doesn't
Right.
Well, what
include
was the-
schools,
Because
does it?
municipal didn't
It
work.
was municipal, right?
It was municipal, but it didn't fit all the things in the categories.
Yeah.
We wanted to, but yeah, I didn't like that word as well either.
Yeah, it's
If you can
kind
think
of
of a
scary.
different word, if you can think of a different word, I'm open to another word. But other
But the
than
point
that,
was, the things that we're discussing here, and particularly the areas that are kind of still open, which is this conversation on FARs and what the
Oh.
space is, they need to get that information back to you so that you can pull that together.
right. Sorry for the confusion. We would not be doing urban regulations next time. That was to kick off next year's work on the urban regulations. While we were talking about policies and the definitions, we thought we should launch that conversation. But those regulations won't be coming back in December, but we hope they'll come back early-ish next year, now that we've started to talk about it.
I still want to provide that FAR information.
Thanks.
Right, because
Yeah,
that'll be
that'll be real
helpful.
helpful.
Because all the schools are in the information you wanted for municipal facilities. We did all those. And it's an eye-opener, that the FAR, but then, like you said, we never required it before, so we never had to work towards that, but
When are you distributing those, that report?
It would be a week before the meeting, so hopefully on the 8th, they will be in the mail for the 15th. Any other questions or thoughts?
Did you guys respond to the carrot part of my suggestion that the recreation space would only be excluded from the FAR calculation if it had some sort of public access component? Did you guys have any objection to that? That sound reasonable?
No, because all of our field areas are utilized by the community.
Okay,
Shortage.
sure.
Super. Anything else?
Anything else you want to bring up? Just going to be here the 8th.
I think so. I'm still in this commission, right?
Yes. Have you interviewed yet? Have they had interviews
No,
for
I haven't heard
transportation
anything.
yet? Okay. Because we did hire a staff person for it, but I haven't heard any more.
Okay, so there'll be at least 4 of us. Okay.
Excellent.
So if there's nothing for the good of the order, I'm going to call the meeting at 8:45.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks,
I
Ann.
think we've